Under the precepts of just naturalism, which forms the basis of classical liberalism, the people of each of the several states compose the body of the popular sovereigns, from which powers of government flow from, rather than the people's rights flowing from their government. This was the core tenet of the anti-federalists who refused to ratify the Constitution without the promise of an all-encompassing Bill of Rights. See the Ninth Amendment for further inquiry. This is directly stated in the preamble of the United States, despite numerous governmental/state actions to the contrary, such as the suppression of the Whiskey Rebellion and the confiscation of gold and silver from the people of the several states in the 30s and 40s, after the unconstitutional Federal Reserve corrupted the financial system of America. Just naturalism, and by extension, classical liberalism and libertarianism, is not about perspective, it is about objective morality, the freedom to believe what you want to believe and the right to do with yourself and your property as you so see fit or with another so far as they may consent to the same. Collective assertions of consensus being used as some sort of virtue to coerce others outside that group and perspective does not give legitimacy to the naturally unlawful actions of the majority. This dissertation will clarify several misconceptions of thought and corruption of minds which are being used as ammunition to literally kill dissidents against the state and communistic anti-virtues such as community barbarity of the rule of might over right. There is an argument circulating the blue-pilled and subpar intelligence communities and strain of anti-intellectual thought. The argument is that one who exercises their rights somehow violates another's rights if the expression is in the least disagreeable, or vaguely represents a category of the rights in another. One such example of this is shouting from the rooftops that the world is becoming a total and absolute tyranny, whereas neighbors may hear these statements in their own houses, and claim that since the house is their property, speech occurring outside of such property can now thereby be limited. This is a fallacious argument, and conflates what one's property rights are. For example, within the right of the complainant would be to install noise-reducing panels in their house to block the sounds of the outside. What would exceed their bounds is to call in thugs/gangsters/goons from the state/government to issue a complaint and furthermore attempt to levy some form of retaliation against the individual expressing their right to speech. One can plainly see that all cars would be illegal if they made a sound if this argument from the complainant were to be logically extended beyond speech or free expression to the broad category of noise, which likewise also includes activities such as forging steel with a hammer, using a power drill, or an earth rammer being operated, which do not contain the same level of protections that the courts afford to speech. The individual who seeks to interfere with speech, regardless of how it is found disagreeable by content or volume, etc., becomes the aggressor at the point which they cross no return and decide to victimize the speaker, whatever their purpose. Minor exceptions to such could be circulating a false report to police or raising an alarm which could reasonably be projected to likely cause injury to others whom are innocent, such as lying and shouting fire in a crowded stadium, and other similar types of fraud. Except in narrow conditions, all other speech is absolutely acceptable, even if not appreciated or desired by others, including saying things like Adolf Hitler was a good man or niggers deserve to die homeless without welfare, etc. Even statements which to the uninformed may vaguely resemble an actual actionable threat, such as saying if anybody files a noise complaint for me speaking out against tyranny, I will kill them and their families. This must be understood in order to have a society which respects free speech and does not create an abridged and thought police-controlled existence. There is another hyperbole and strawman ready for the gaslighting to cook the red herring, which is that natural rights absolutists just want to kill anybody who disagrees with them. This is an outright fabrication, and may actually delve into defamation and slander, with potentially serious consequences for the victim of such patent falsehood advertised as a true fact. Saying that libertarians whom are willing to kill others who oppress them in any form, public or private, one, few, or many, is somehow espousing violence, or asserting that classical liberals push their specific worldviews on others because of an absolutist understanding of freedom and exercise in their universal unalienable rights, consists of a logically fallacious argument, and by saying that libertarians/classic liberals simply want to destroy those who oppose them, is an overly reductionist, disingenuous hyperbole, and a strawman red herring argument meant to gaslight the recipient and those who observe the conversation and its effect and effects thereafter. the use of defensive force beyond immediate self-defense is still a value of just naturalis/ts/m and goes so far as to use force to defend against any form of coercion or other form of tyranny, including up to using maximum force to kill foreign or domestic enemies of rights/freedoms, after they have commenced in a natural crime against you or others. Planning to defend from aggressors in no way constitutes premeditation, nor does openly discussing and agreeing to do so establish an actionable conspiracy to commit a crime, as it is quite the opposite. It is to evade criminals of any type who will oppress and subjugate you and/or others, and preparing yourself/f/ves for what must be done to secure rights and future prosperity against the destructive and chaotic forces of evil, which can be objectively measured in this case as the violation of any right, to whatever degree it may so occur. These individuals seem very confused about what classical liberals and libertarians think. There is no obligation to let someone attack and kill you because fighting back would be enforcing your ideals on him. The only time a just naturalist can themselves justify the use of force which does not constitute violence under such context is in acts of self-defense and/or defense of others, against any action or threat of action which interferes with the rights of any other which they have victimized or are planning to victimize. Put another way, violence can only ever be justifiably used in defending the rights also known as personal freedoms of oneself and another. To summarize the point, the only reason individuals or groups can justify the use of force is to defend oneself or another against someone or others who is or are using force on you or somebody else, not merely for disagreeing with ideas or expressions of the free exercise in rights upon one's own ambit. We don't push our ideals on anyone else. Our whole entire ideology is based around pushing back against those who use government to violently force their ideals on everyone else. This must be understood if one wants to take a seat at the table of thinking human beings above the realm of simpler creatures like snails and jellyfish. The fact is that rights, by their virtue, never being wrongs, are unlimited, despite whatever false/illegitimate authority tries to claim it can curtail them. These are known as unalienable rights, not to be confused with the misnomer inalienable, which has different connotations. Anybody seeking to circumvent them is either a foreign or domestic enemy of we the people of each of these United States which compose the whole of America. Statist justifications for violence against persons and circumvention of their rights are as old as recorded history and goes back even further with tribal coercion and group politics since we climbed down from the trees and started using rocks to kill animals to eat. There are utilitarian and value-based arguments for the superiority of humans over animals, and being the greater species and an oddity of nature in our creative and constructive capacities, have the most reserved emphasis/priority for preservation, not to discount the importance of preserving the general biome of the planet, including preventing the extinction of species and habitats by ecological damage caused by humans, within a balancing act of the interest of human beings against the remainder of the interests on Earth requiring representation and defense. There are several moral dilemmas by picking either one as an exclusive extreme, and also natural consequences of preserving nature to the destruction of humans, as likewise to preserve only humans and to destroy the remainder of nature. The fundamental libertarian principle is the non-aggression principle, in addition to the principle of non-intervention, and the presumption of non-authority except of oneself over their own self or that which they have created a stake in. This means it is wrong to initiate coercive force, act of violence, against others. It does not forbid extreme force in self-defense. If you start something, such as commit an assault or direct one to be commenced, your victim has every right to fight back, and to assemble a party who mutually consents to assist in their defense. By initiating or instigating force, fraud, or the threat thereof to be demonstrated upon and against an innocent, is for the initiator of such aggression to forfeit their rights for the very same naturally criminal act, which includes to sacrifice their life and fate to their victim's discretion. The opponents of libertarianism want to use coercive force for a number of purposes, such as to provide people with welfare, to educate people, or any number of noble-seeming goals funded by taxation and/or conscription which actually cannot be achieved by such methods. When libertarians want to fight against that, they are using a defensive mentality, and their use of force is intellectually and naturally lawfully, as well as objectively morally, justified. Enforcing libertarian ideals means using defensive force. An example of a libertarian ideal is that mixing one's labor with resources creates a stake in the outcome, and mixing labor with such natural resources creates property which one shall have a right in by their stake in its creation/production. If every man has the absolute right to his justly held property, it then follows that he has the right to keep that property, which entails the right to defend it by violence against violent invasion. In fact, this, along with the right to life and liberty, forms the premise of the justification of the state and its police as well as military powers. Absolute pacifists who also assert their belief in property right, such as some landlords, are caught in an inescapable inner contradiction, for if a human owns property and yet is denied the right to defend it against attack, then it is clear that a very important aspect of that ownership is being denied to them. To say that someone has the absolute right to a certain property but lacks the right to defend it against attack or invasion is also to say that he does not have total right to that property. This can also encompass the self, by ascribing the label property to one's own physical corporeal form. How extensive is a man's right of self-defense of person and property? The basic answer must be, up to the point at which he begins to infringe on the property rights of someone else, for in that case, his defense would in itself constitute a criminal invasion of the just property of some other man, which the latter could properly defend himself against. An example of this would be to steal a gun to kill a robber or rapist, with the exception being that stealing their gun cannot be a true theft, since they have forfeit their rights by initiating aggression or the threat thereof, or force, theft, or fraud, similarly to how one cannot threaten somebody who threatens them, but they can make warning and promises to exact restitution and slash or revenge, upon which basis it may be attained. Pacifism is only possible when you have a society that uses other means to coerce people instead of the individual attempting to assert their will upon another, such as using the police/state violence to get one's way, more or less having somebody else do your dirty work. So the question boils down to, how do free individuals dare defend themselves? Well, classical liberals and libertarians are not pacifists. Pacifists can only exist in societies which have rude men standing ready to do violence on their behalf. The acceptable use of force to a libertarian is force used to defend freedom/liberty, otherwise summarized in their modalities as rights. Leaving one alone to do as they wilt does not mean to leave them open to infringe on someone else's liberty/freedom and numerous rights. The disinformed, ignorant, unenlightened, unwashed, and non-sanctified masses want to push their agenda and worldview on others, and then claim it is hypocritical of free men bereft of the entitlements in their universally endowed natural rights. To counter this with the opposite philosophy, enlighten, warn, and forcefully resist such tyranny, they argue there is somehow an equivalency to the validity of an opinion based on subjective criteria, in which they will argue there is no objective measure, or will use a logical fallacy to try and dupe another into agreeing to this. But not all opinions are equally valid or even have value at all, except as an illustration of what to not believe or do. One can see the natural consequence of both these countervalent underlying ideologies when projecting them into a future where the polarization drifts towards infinity in either direction. Let us quote Orwell, aka Eric Arthur Blair, upon the natural outcome of such an authoritarian and collectivist society. There will be no curiosity, no enjoyment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always, do not forget this, Winston, always there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing and constantly growing subtler. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. Now let us counter it with the opposite team's victory. Eternal vigilance is the price we pay for liberty. A law repugnant to natural/human rights is no law at all, but an edict opposed to the precept of the just authority on which civil government is granted its limited and narrowly defined powers, and therefore invalid on its face, and shall be rendered being eternally null and void from thereforward. Everyone naturally and universally possesses the right to resist any so-called law order that infringes on their rights/immunities, freedoms, privileges, or guarantees. and when it is not possible or reasonable to resort to the public authorities, to use force to repel any aggression against them, the people, by natural virtue and universal law, retain the right to resist unlawful arrests, laws, or orders, which themselves are forms of true terrorism, being acts of violence by the government upon the people and persons, for which it is the purpose of legitimate and civil government to secure such by law in each of the state legislatures. Rebellion against tyranny is an essential pillar to uphold freedom/liberty, which exists in order to promote the natural rights and secure justice, where thereby it is a citizen's natural duty to their state and/or country to rebel, which governments ought to secure by law. This itself refers to the essential duty of any person, but particularly the citizenry, to rebel against unjust laws, orders, and actions, which are any of those laws or actions that are contrary to, devaluate, or which do violate any of the natural rights or natural justice. Such duty entails that people dismiss, oppose, forcibly resist, and correct any violations of natural rights and justice by any unjust law, order, or action of any territory, state, locality, the Union, or any other jurisdiction or facility/fort/installation under the dominion or control of the nation, any state, or other level of sovereignty, including from imminent threats against them such as standing armies erected to enforce these violations of volition. Destroying the existential threat of authoritarians and their goons/minions serves beyond an act of self-preservation as a protective measure for the future and the fate of society as a whole. There cannot be a civil society without enforcing this moral imperative. Anything else will be a form of natural criminality and state of despotism. Common misconceptions fuel the authoritarianism of an intrinsically criminal society based on consensus of opinion rather than undebatable facts by paradoxical doublethink, and a quelling of their own cognitive dissonance by prescribing contradiction as its cure. One of these issues lies in the meaning of words and their official meaning in law versus common vernacular. Principles such as aggression and violence are applied every day to situations where no rights are violated, such as tone of voice, attitude, and demonstrated frustration, assertiveness of one's own self/person, demeanor, and the level of agitation, without an imminent threat of the initiation of force, known as violence, or aggression proper. One's perception of a situation is irrelevant. Remember, there are people who hallucinate that demons are everywhere, that aliens are giving them secret messages because they are a messiah, and all other like of factitious delusion. Knowing the difference between maximum defensive force and violence is key in the debate about what are the limits of one's own actions. Another is commonly consumed, which is the word freedom, which is exactly equivalent to liberty, despite what the persistently uninformed and ignorant masses assert. They may commonly cite you are free to commit a crime, but it is not your liberty. What they are asserting is a conflation equivalent to the mathematical space of time's multiple dimensions as somehow being reducible and equivocal to space itself, which is a false reduction and requires miscategorization from the outset. Hilariously, this erroneous misnomer of thought is actually quite common within the educated scientific community, who have been indoctrinated to think things such as the speed of light being a universal speed limit, black holes are mathematical singularities points, etc. Most of this can be disproven by pure mathematics or actual physical measurements. The very lack of legitimate authority inherent in a majority of the populace as to the definitions and lawful meanings of words and legal axioms creates a situation that justifies limiting who may wield any quantum of political power aside from protest by a qualification test in order to be registered as a unit of the electorate. As used in the example above, aggression is in the context to the mutual non-aggression principle and is properly defined as truly threatening or initiating any forcible/coercive interference with an individual or individual's property or the exercise of any of their rights/immunities, freedoms, privileges, or guarantees therewith. The non-aggression principle does not forbid defensive posturing or forceful defense. Force or compulsion/coercion/extortion is defined as taking/damaging/destroying or threatening to take/damage/destroy someone else's life and health. Liberty/freedom and autonomy/independence, self-security and freedom to secure others and self-defense and freedom to defend others, privacy, property, and the pursuit of happiness. The meaning of the word threat is also critically important. To summarize, one cannot threaten one whom initiates force upon them or attempts to coerce, defraud, or steal from another by promising such aggressive action. True threats are statements where the speaker means to communicate by means made verbally, in writing, or by telephone or electronic device, a serious expression of an intent to commit an act of unjust force to a particular individual or group of individuals, though the speaker need not actually intend to carry out the threat/s. Even a statement that appears to threaten violence may not be a true threat if the context indicates that it only expressed political opposition, was emotionally charged rhetoric, hyperbole, or issued statements uttered in jest, or as part of a character for a creative expressive performance. Defensive posturing, including issuing a verbal statement/s of intent to use defensive force, is not a threat, but a non-obligate warning against an potential or actual aggressor. A true threat requires a reasonable person to foresee that the statement would be objectively interpreted in such a manner by both the maker and those whom the maker communicates, as to a statement of a serious expression of their intention to aggress against the rights of another, that the defendant/offender subjectively intended and seriously expressed to threaten unjust force/injury/harm/assault and communicated so in an unconditional, unequivocal, immediate, and specific manner as to be received as an actual threat, in order to instill fear in the recipient, which is not induced under intimidation or duress, and that the threat placed the victim/s in a state of actual, reasonable, and sustained fear. The essential elements of any real threat are as follows: 1. A directed party/target, or receiver of the threat, 2. An implement or means of giving the threat, 3. The substance of which constitutes the clear willful threat of unjust force, theft, or fraud itself, 4. Imminency, immediacy, or /an unjust triggering condition/s, 5. A reasonable and actual belief that the issuer would be capable of carrying out the aggression. There is also a definitional difference between legal and lawful, which most people are absolutely oblivious of, and will regurgitate rhetoric that if it is somehow scribbled on a piece of paper with a politician's signature, it is therefore just to enforce this will upon others whom do not consent to be governed and have violated none of the natural and constitutional rights of anybody, while being held to liability for the whimsy/zeitgeist of the populace. Legal implies that it is statutory or constitutionally conferred power that is enforced by the barrel of a gun, whereas lawful ascribes a direct connection to natural rights and natural justice, which form the fundamental scaffolding of natural law, so as in square and rectangles, not everything which is statutorily/constitutionally legal is actually/truly lawful, and but all which is really lawful is by extension legal. Because of the potential for a critical mass of the population to not understand their freedoms and civil governance, a strong argument can be made against all adults being granted privilege to vote, since the apparatus of the state can easily be tooled to do their bidding rather than enforce and support the natural and constitutional rights of the people. Therefore, it should be noted that a political participation process which requires qualifications in order to have a unit of power as a voter is suitable to avoid this risk, such as a civics exam on the rightful purpose and limits of state/governmental power, as well as proving that one understands the terms employed in the political vehicle, as well as are capable of reciting a list of their civil and criminal rights, and making a passing grade on their competency to wield political power for themselves. We do not live in a consensus-based reality, and popularity of a particular tyranny in our time does not thereby naturally justify it. Libertarians make up a small minority of the electorate. However, they are many of the few who actually have qualification to wield political power, knowing its risks and natural limits. Consequential to the ability to dissent, libertarians can prove their moral superiority to any other political division over the fact that natural rights form the basis of the social contract, and that any debasement of such rights stands as an existential threat, whereas others who disagree with the classical liberal perspective of absolute universal unalienable natural rights will plead that by unlimited freedom being the law of the land, their rights are somehow being imposed upon. Their paradox of claiming intelligence as a sapient being, the freedom to dissent, and then quashing that in another, shows they are intrinsically forfeit in any argument they have about being violated, being so easily ready to sow upon another so long as their numbers can overpower the resistance from their intellectually superior enlightened Renaissance revolutionist types. People who claim that one's rights end when another finds their exercise disagreeable are delusional and do not deserve to benefit from a society which is intended to preserve the natural freedom of we the people. This brings us to what is known as the paradox of tolerance. We do not tolerate the intolerant states that if a society's practice of tolerance is inclusive of the intolerant, intolerance will ultimately dominate, eliminating the tolerant and the practice of tolerance with them. The paradox as arises from the self-contradictory idea that, in order to maintain a tolerant society, the society must retain the right to be intolerant of intolerance. Those who have no conception of the meaning of equal and universal rights, and will impose their ignorance by their initiation of force which thereby constituted violence, or to serve as an accomplice to the same by justification of others initiating force upon another, the innocent, not only deserve no benefit from them speaking as to their rights, but fundamentally have forfeit the very same. However, those who merely disagree with free exercise, but do not create consequence or coercion for such expression, do not categorically fall into the label of violator/aggressor, and may continue to benefit from the same rights as equal in all others. This goes so far as the category of liberty/freedom, as to say that those who do not respect freedom/liberty deserve none themselves, being applied as extremely as those who violate the rights of another may immediately or as soon as may be affected, be put to death by their victim or any of those innocents who come to the victim's aid, by them having forfeit their rights/as to their victim. This is expressed in John Locke's second treatise of civil government, chapter 3, The State of War, which more or less states with minor clarifications added by myself. The state of war is a state of enmity and destruction, and therefore declaring by word or action, not a passionate and hasty but a sedate settled design upon another man's life, puts him in a state of war with him against whom he has declared such an intention, and so has exposed his life to the other's power to be taken away by him or any one that joins with him in his defense, and espouses his quarrel. It being reasonable and just, I should have a right to destroy that which threatens me with destruction, for by the fundamental law of nature, man being to be preserved as much as possible, when all cannot be preserved, the safety of the innocent is to be preferred, and one may destroy a man who makes war upon him, or has discovered an enmity to his being, for the same reason that he may kill a wolf or a lion, because such men are not under the ties of the common law of reason, have no other rule but that of force and violence, and so may be treated as beasts of prey, those dangerous and noxious creatures, that will be sure to destroy him whenever he falls into their power. Thus, hence it is that they slash them who attempts to get another person into their absolute power does thereby put himself into a state of war with him, it being to be understood as a declaration of a design upon his life. For I have reason to conclude that he who would get me into his power without my consent would use me as he pleased when he had got me there, and destroy me too when he had a fancy to it, for nobody can desire to have me in his absolute power unless it be to compel me by force to that which is against the right of my freedom, i.e. make me a slave. To be free from such force is the only security of my preservation, and reason bids me look on him as an enemy to my preservation, who would take away that freedom which is the fence to it, so that he who makes an attempt to enslave me thereby puts himself into a state of war with me. He that, in the state of nature, would take away the freedom that belongs to any one in that state, must necessarily be supposed to have a design to take away everything else, that freedom being the foundation of all the rest, as he that, in the state of society, would take away the freedom belonging to those of that society or commonwealth, must be supposed to design to take away from them everything else, and so be looked on as in a state of war. This makes it lawful for a man to kill a suppressor or thief, who has not in the least hurt him, nor declared any design upon his life, any farther than, by the use of force, theft, fraud, or the threat thereof, so as to get their victim in his power, as to obstruct or take away their wrongful/lie expressive acts and or acquired money/possessions, or whatever else the violator/instigator pleases from him, because using force, where he has no right, to get me into their power, let their pretense be whatever it will, one has no reason to suppose that them/they, who would obstruct or take away my liberty, would not, when they had me in their power, take away everything else upon their whimsy and despotic tendencies. And therefore it is naturally lawful for me to treat him as one who has put himself into a state of war with me, i.e., I may kill or enslave them if I can, whenever that may be, in the interest of securing justice and protecting against further harms to myself or another victim, for to that hazard does he justly expose himself, whoever introduces a state of war, and is an initiator of aggress/iron/or in it. Where here we have the plain difference between the state of nature and the state of war, which however some men have confounded, are as far distant as a state of peace. goodwill, mutual assistance and preservation, and a state of enmity, malice, violence and mutual destruction, are one from another. Men living together according to reason as may be common or rare in their age, when there is a common superior on earth or legitimate third-party authority to judge between them, is properly the state of nature, but force, or a declared design of force, upon the personhood and exercise/s of another, where there is no common superior on earth to appeal to for relief, is the state of war, and it is the want of such an appeal which gives a man the right of war, even against an aggressor, which is to enslave or kill them to secure the victim's future exercise in right/s. Though he may be in society and a fellow subject to the just/natural laws which that society prescribes to. Thus a censor or thief, whom I cannot harm but by appeal to the natural law, for having obstructed my free speech, or having stolen anything for that which I am worth by my rightful acquisition, I may thereby then kill or enslave, when he sets on me to coerce me to silence, or to rob me of any possession which is mine or under my custody/control, because the true law/s of nature, which were made for my preservation, where it cannot interpose to secure my life from present force by civil governance, which, if lost, is capable of no reparation post haste, absolutely permits me my own defense, and the right of war, which is the universal and unceasing liberty to kill the aggressor/initiator of violence, because the aggressor/violator allows not time or place to appeal to our common judge, nor the decision of true law for remedy in a case where the mischief may be irreparable. Want of a common judge with authority puts all men in a state of nature, force without right, also known as the initiation of aggression upon a man's person or property, creates a natural state of war, both where there is, and is not, a common judge. Plus, however, when the actual force or its imminence or a continuing threat thereof, under any condition, and from any vector is over, the state of war ceases between those that are in civil society, and are equally on both sides subjected to the impartial/fair determination of the law and not legalese, or statutory provision alone, because then there lies open the remedy of appeal for the past injury, and to prevent future harm, but where no such appeal is, as in the state of nature, for want of positive laws, and judges with legitimate authority to appeal to, the state of war once begun, continues, with a right to the innocent party to destroy the other whenever he can, until the aggressor/s offers peace, and desires reconciliation on such terms as may repair any wrongs he has already done, and secure the innocent for the future, nay, where an appeal to the law and constituted judges lies open, but the remedy is denied by a manifest perverting of true justice, and a barefaced wresting of the legalese/false laws to protect or indemnify the violence or injuries of some men, or party of men. There it is hard to imagine anything but a state of war, for wherever violence is used, and injury done, though by hands appointed to administer justice, it is still violence and injury, however coloured with the name, pretences, or forms of alleged and so-called law/s, the end whereof being to protect and redress the innocent, by an unbiased application of it, to all who are under it. Wherever that is not bona fide done, war is made upon the sufferers, who having no appeal on earth to right them, they are left to the only remedy in such cases, an appeal to heaven. In this accord, one may rightfully apply unlimited force in defense and rebellion/revolution against the insurrection of the state against the people it is purported to protect, serve, defend, and uphold all political charters made under their just authority. Just authority means a government operating under the will of the people, and in times/circumstances where the government is repugnant to this end, just authority rests solely upon the people themselves, in strong consensus, as far as either is within any one or any other aggregation of their individual natural rights. It is the greatest civic duty of the people for them to preserve and protect the equal rights of others whom are non-aggressors, even in the case of perhaps disagreeable, though none the less just conduct of an individual through the exercise of their rights. All people have the freedom from retaliation for exercising any of their rights, guarantees, or privileges. Both public and private actors/parties owe an obligation to any other entity they may interact or transact with to uphold the mutual natural and constitutional rights in the other or others, animals, and nature. In the context of natural persons' rights, freedom or liberty is defined as living life with the least amount of force or threat of force used against you as possible. Government cannot create liberty/freedom. It can only respect, preserve, protect, restore, or destroy it. Freedom/liberty is a universally endowed natural right and exists in the absence of any government. Liberty/freedom is the ability to use your life and estate/property the way you want to, as long as it does not take away from someone else's freedom/liberty to do the same with their life and property/estate. Liberty/freedom is what you are naturally able to do in the absence of someone threatening to use force against you, murder you, kidnap you, or steal and slash or destroy your estate/property. It is the power of the will to follow the dictates of its unrestricted choice, and to direct the external acts of themselves as an individual without restraint, coercion, or control from other persons. Everyone is entitled to do anything they want to so long as it doesn't interfere with the first law, life, or someone else's other rights. It is a condition in which a person's will regarding their own person and property is unopposed by any other will. It is an exemption from extraneous control. It is the power of the will, in its moral freedom, to follow the dictates of its unrestricted choice, and to direct the external acts of the individual without restraint, coercion, or control from other persons. Individual freedom is the lack of formal or informal external restraints imposed by one person or group of people upon another, save for the collective coercion aimed at preventing individuals from acting forcibly or fraudulently against their neighbors. It is the absence of human impediment to the voluntary action of fellow human beings. The permissible limitation on free choice is the recognition of an equal ambit of choice to all other individuals. It is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, so long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs, or impede their efforts to obtain it. Mankind are greater gainers by suffering each other to live as seems good to themselves, than by compelling each to live as seems good to the rest. The word freedom comes from Old English and liberty from Old French, and they both mean unconstrained. Humans are naturally born free. Everyone has the free will to determine their own destiny. Liberty is the right of each person to do as they choose with their own person and property, so long as they do not interfere, by force, theft, or fraud, or the threat thereof, with the equal right of others to do as they choose with their own person and property. It is a person's right to live their life the way that they choose to do so, which goes so far as to not impede another individual's or others' right/s to do the same. All persons are entitled to the full and unrestrained use of all their natural and acquired powers and capacities, but such use by the individual, or by aggregations of individuals, may not rightly extend to infringement upon, or abridgment of, the same use in other persons. It is the right to unobstructed action according to our will within limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. It is not necessarily what is within the limits of the law, because the law is often but an edict of the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the individual. All individuals are naturally in a condition of perfect freedom to order their actions, and dispose of their possessions and persons as they think fit, within the bounds of just naturalism, without asking leave or depending upon the will of any other man. It is the natural state to do whatever one wants, so long as one does not harm. Harming another would be classified as aggression, in consideration of the mutual non-aggression principle. It is a condition of perfect freedom for an individual/s to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons/s as they see fit, within the bounds of the laws of nature, without asking leave or depending upon the will of any other entity. A condition also of equality, wherein all the power and jurisdiction is reciprocal, no one having more than another, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of nature and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection. It is the law of nature which obliges every one, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that, being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in their life and health. Liberty/freedom and autonomy/independence, self-security or self-defense, and right to secure defend others, privacy, possessions/property, or pursuing their own individual happiness. Liberty is the freedom to pursue your own good in your own way without other people limiting your options or forcing you to fulfill their needs first. Of course, believing in freedom/liberty and human rights is not a pick and choose endeavor. Very much in the same vein as being pregnant, You either do or not have the mentality of a despot and slash or sheep slash chattel. You either believe it in your core of being and defend it, or you justify its reduction by any means which you can be duped or can dupe others into believing, and earn the chains of slavery at the hands of anybody who would decide to be an arbitrary master over you. Any so-called law which levies a punishment without one having violated the rights of another is plainly arbitrary and logically null/void, or no true force or effect, except by those selfish or foolish enough to support and enforce them. May their bonds rest lightly upon them, for the day they shall awaken and regain consciousness, because until they do, they will never revolt. Revolution is the natural consequence of any form of tyranny, which is always a big deal, and there is no act of despotism which is small and may be reduced down to innocence in fact, but can only ever be protected by legal fictions of edicts and legalese which attempt to perform mental gymnastics to make 2 + 2 = 5 and 3 wrongs making a right. All people recognize the right and duty of revolution, that is, the right and duty to refuse allegiance to, and to resist, the government when its inefficiency, oppression, or tyranny are great and unendurable. Resistance to oppression is the consequence of the other rights of persons. There is oppression against the social body when a single one of its members is oppressed. There is oppression against every member when the social body is oppressed. Government is instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the whole community, and not for the private interest or emolument of any one individual, family, group, or class of people. Therefore, whenever the ends of government are perverted, and public liberty manifestly endangered, and all other means of redress are ineffectual, the people may, and of right ought to reform the old, or establish a new government or a suitable lack thereof. The doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression/repression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of humankind. Governments are instituted among people to secure the people's rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most expedient, being most likely to positively affect the security of their safety, liberty, and happiness. When a long train of abuses and usurpations reduce the people to be ruled under absolute despotism, it is their most inviolable of rights, and their most indispensable of duties, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security and freedom. Whenever the government endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any farther obedience, and are left to the common refuge, which is provided for all people universally, against force and violence. Whensoever therefore the government shall transgress this fundamental rule of society, and either by ambition, fear, folly, or corruption, endeavor to grasp themselves, or put into the hands of any other an absolute power over the lives, liberties, and estates of the people, by this breach of trust they forfeit the power the people had put into their hands for quite contrary ends, and it devolves to the people, who have a right to resume their original liberty. If the usurping despots continue their tyranny, a lot of people are going to be seriously hurt. I can only pray that the bulk of them are actors and supporters of the state/government, and that their families will be eradicated from the genetic heritage of the earth. I guess you could say I sometimes appreciate and accept genocide, as long as it is tyrannicide, including charging and sentencing families of corrupt blood to death at trial. Praise be to God. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom, and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. The corrupt powers over this world know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy, for resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. Basically, we are opposed to other people imposing their ideas on everyone else, including that defensive force may only sometimes be justified in immediate defense from life-threatening actors or conditions/devices/etc. We oppose government-provided health care funded on taxation, because taxation is theft by its very definition and lack of virtue. People who want government-provided, taxpayer-funded health care are imposing their own ideas on those who are forced to pay for it, regardless of if those who pay for it even benefit at all from such a program. People who want to regulate the economy to control the free flow of capital and good as well as services are the ones imposing their ideas on others and directing an obstruction to exercise of the right to property. People who like a government-backed private central bank are the ones imposing their idea of what money should be on everyone else. Libertarians support free banking, which would allow people to create and even define money as they may so shall choose. People who want any form of tax system are imposing/forcing their ideas on others by aggression in the very act of taking their money from them. Just naturalists are opposed to such an imposition. Those who complain about libertarians wanting to enforce their ideals on others sound to me like a mugger that is complaining that his victim has a gun. If others do not start anything, will not be nothing for them to worry about. It is the moral responsibility of the oppressed to neutralize the true treats and coercive forces against them. Defense of ideals is not the initiation of force, and protecting against a society where the future is the ideological antithesis of freedom/liberty and the free exercise and expressive nature of rights is an act of self-preservation beyond one's own life or even plane of existence. Scapegoats and patsies are typically harmless victims who are created into folk devils and framed as societal menaces in order to justify authoritarian/totalitarian policies used against them and people from the same group of strain of intellectual thought. If one wants to find their mutual enemy of society, they only need to look into the list of victims created by the state/government and every actor, public or private, who has contributed to such outcome/s. Therefore, ergo vis the answer/solution to 1984 is 1776, else death. Our legislators are not sufficiently apprised of the rightful limits of their powers, that their true office is to declare and enforce only our natural rights and duties, and to take none of them from us. No man has a natural right to commit aggression on the equal rights of another, and this is all from which the laws ought to restrain him. And every man is under the natural duty of contributing to the necessities of the society, and this is all the laws should enforce on him. And no man having a natural right to be the judge between himself and another, it is his natural duty to submit to the umbrage of an impartial third. When the laws have declared and enforced all this, they have fulfilled their functions, and the idea is quite unfounded that on entering into society we give up any natural right. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to Francis W. Gilmer. The doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive to the good and happiness of mankind. Doubtlessly, this will fly right over every mental midget's head, or come in one ear and fall out the other, like their brain out the back of their head, lacking a mind which could even be opened properly. And now, having blessed you with knowledge by the grace of my labors and the efforts of God to direct my mind and actions, I leave you, and wish you many happy trails, until you are home again. Shalom, Om, and Amen. May Yeshua Krishna and Prometheus's great Holy Spirit guide you. Don't be a moron, come back into the light of the divine, and ascend beyond your worldly natural personhood, thereafter becoming one of the spiritual people of the kingdom of heaven. Be the change you wish to see.